Redundant. And now for the fucking news. Everyone has a home address, a physical piece of property on which they permanently reside. And on this property are two houses, one in which they are raised and which seems most natural and attractive to them, with the other remaining mostly an unexplored possibility. A certain man mused, if we define death as the acceptance of the inevitable, then what should be our definition of living? There are two things of which the mind is capable: thinking and knowing. And the difference is that thinking can be wrong and knowing cannot. And while thinking is the door to knowing, knowing is not thinking. Also, when you know something, there's nothing more to think about it. And finally, thinking is a type of agitated obsession, while knowing is a calm certainty. One man says that what he finds most annoying from other people is them, just in the mechanical flow of social conversation, asking him how he's doing. He says upon becoming aware of this, he finds it highly suspicious and deserving of further scrutiny. And as he walked away, you could hear him repeating to himself, how am I doing? How am I doing? How am I doing? How am I doing? With consciousness, you can either be in the thinking mode, which is automatic and operates without your attention, or in the knowing mode, which you know that you're in and which requires your intention and continuing attention. One man found a totally unexpected treasure, and upon closer examination discovered it to be in two parts, one of which, though, somehow seemed very familiar. So there it was, both entirely new and yet partially old. What a curious find. More distinctions. Thinking is a question. Knowing is the answer. Thinking is calculation. Knowing is the sum. Thinking is always challenged by other thinking. Knowing has no opposition. And while thinking is a journey, knowing is the destination. More precise demographics. Within humanity, there are the ordinary, the vast majority of men, and there are the few, those interested in individual internal change. And then there are the fewest of the few, those actually trying to effect change. Thus it be, and thus has it always been. Thinking, knowing, and human relationships. If you think about people rather than know them, it's impossible not to get mentally entangled with them. For a while, one man accepted his repetitive mental ramblings to be continuing restatements of his position. Then began having questions regarding the nature of positions which needed to be repeated 11 million times. Plus, realized the positions weren't his anyway. As he pondered the world of thinking, a man mused, if it takes two to have a fight, then surely it must take two to make peace. What might this be trying to tell me regarding thinking's limitations and how it attempts to disguise them? In some realms, you simply can't get anywhere on a two-way street. To celebrate his bar the mitzvah from the door day, a father told the son, if you don't want to lie, don't talk. Then later, to help confirm his confirmation, added, understanding, of course, that lying is only of consequence to oneself. A man long involved in the struggle once said, it seems we knock at a locked door, and methinks the secret is in realizing that our thinking is the door, and behind it lies nothing. Then the only question is, why was it locked to begin with? Or will we eventually see we were mistaken in believing that it was? All in all, a strange affair, and I assume as always that the secret is in knowing what's going on. Unique in this universe is a substance in the human nervous system whose overflow, in part, runs off uphill.
Yeah.
Are we by any chance here talking about the apparent passions of the mind? Very good, sir. Very good indeed. If you don't think metaphorically, then thinking's not really ever going to do you much good. Am I or am I not the master of understatement? After reading the instructions that came with a coffee maker, which gave specific directions on how to keep the brew from being weak and tasteless, one man thought, what a shame it was that he didn't have the authors of the manual available to help him run his own life, or at least to participate in the writing of his obituary. As he began to see it play itself out in his awareness, one man started to picture thinking as a form of adhesive and knowing as the solvent. Then there was this other chap who went a bit further and began to see the operation as thinking being a magnetic force and knowing being the understanding of the laws of physics. And yet, in another instance, we find a fellow who presently perceives it thusly, that thinking is a form of blindness and knowing the ability to see. And in what might be the final word in this kind of picturization, one man imagines the situation to be that thinking is like a catatonic state, with knowing being a return to consciousness. Note, it is mostly those who don't know what they're talking about who do most of the talking. How many more examples need we to authenticate my claim to the title of the sovereign of the understatement? Would you care for another plain example of how thinking operates? Consider the many mystical treatises of past authors, 20 pages and less, with contemporary introductions and translators' prefaces in the 200-page range. A young prince said to the royal tutor, "Tell me about the life of the great one who was the father of our people, but tell me of his exploits and adventures, not of his understanding." And thus did the heir apparent reveal himself to be a true child of his line. Look away, look away, look far away. Look away is the nature of the mind. If you have a point you feel you must prove, you don't have a point worth proving. Look away, look away. According to legend, the head of one family told all concerned that they were not to call the thinking they did thinking unless it was under their willful direction and control. What has greater potential to make things easy, than that which is simple and that which is so. Well, why do you think that those who know only talk about the obvious? The real secret is the secret itself, and thus the word secret conveys no useful information and must be realized as metaphorical. As he opened a can, a man noted that the reason he liked artificially sweetened imitation root beer is that it has no sugar, no roots, and no beer. A situation, he says, that somehow always reminds him of his thinking. The title of this next song is The Past, or Mama, Mama, Won't You Talk to My Mind for Me? Just because you have luggage in the closet is no reason you must talk about it and drag it out to show to visitors. Mama, Mama. One attribute of a more conscious man is that he mostly ignores things, understanding that the things referred to are mental. Another characteristic is that he is primarily without passion, that is, non-physically speaking. One man's concept of it: my name is not my name till I prefer it be. Intelligence comes not from thinking, but from knowing. The mystic's ultimate, heartbreaking, ball-busting, up against the wall lament. It doesn't matter how many tricks and methods you know if you can't remember to use them. Jesus. The beauty of thinking is in its complexity and conflicting diversity. The beauty of knowing is in its unified simplicity. As knowing overtakes thinking, a man is as a candle, acting as his own fuel, consuming himself. A father told his son, no longer all that young, never abandon your search for magic, but do refine your understanding thereof. Question me this: if talk is an analysis of action, then what is thinking an analyzation of? More regarding home. It's easier to stay at the place where you normally stay than it is anywhere new. To be truly religious and spiritual, you must know what you're doing, not be merely thinking about it. Thinking is just thinking, but knowing is an experience. Another view of how life is, but in terms too large to be taken in with just one or two eyes. While some things are good enough for some people, everything is good enough for everybody. Thinking speaks in code, and the first task is to break it so as to understand it. How much simpler can we make it? All criticism is from ignorance. And still another difference. Consciousness is controlled by thinking, but through knowing one is conscious. In recognition of his other end circumcision, one father said to the son, remember, if it can squeak, it can be oiled. But Just because you can oil it doesn't necessarily mean that it will stop squeaking. I just read them. With those who undertake this path, it is most common that they initially think, it feels right, but seems too complex to ever understand. Coming later to, it is right, and could not be clearer. While thinking is endless speculation, knowing is knowing. To take my division of human consciousness into the two possibilities of thinking and knowing for the sake of what I was trying to point to, and combine it with one other thing. If this is human consciousness, and we have it divided up into the possibility of thinking and of knowing, and that you consider that consciousness has two directions in which to involve itself. And just quite simply put, obviously, is the external, the world out there, and then apparently on itself, that is, on the internal. All right. If you'll keep all of this in mind, then consider some things. And by the way, when I said that it's just sort of ad hoc and all the things I make up, it has a quite real, valid basis. You can observe it yourself. Under all ordinary conditions, a man is involved with thinking. The thinking, under almost all ordinary conditions, concerns itself with matters out there. If you challenge an ordinary person to that and they naysayed it, if they denied that that was true and tried to give you an example, I'm just going to point out, because I'm not going to attempt to prove it, with ordinary people, if they say that that is not so, that they devote some amount of their consciousness, their mental attention to themselves internally, it's on the basis of them thinking about some way that external affairs is affecting them. The idea, the actual idea that I'm saying of the consciousness turning itself on itself is almost an unknown quantity. As always, when you're dealing with the mind, with consciousness, there is a slippery, trickery, beautiful dynamic afoot, and that is that the mind can say that it does this, and after that, for you to try to tell it otherwise is a world-class fool's tap dance. That is, once humans, which all humans would agree to, whether they've ever said this or not, but all sane people would say that to some degree they are reflective, they're self-reflective, and that they do spend some of their mental life reflecting on the nature of themselves internally, who they are, what they think, just themselves personally. Now, once that has been stated, which it was stated soon after, poor old Adam found himself in less than his original comfortable position. Mm-hmm. It was just shortly after that that when it started, he went, "What'd I do?" That is, he found himself outside the garden wearing cheap polyester clothes and having to work for a living, and that God wouldn't talk to him directly anymore. So just think about it. He's outside the garden there, the door slams on him, and he said, is that not? That is the basis of the human reflective, philosophical self-investigation. Now for at least 5,000 or 6,000 years, this is the best they can do is but notice, even using my example, The only reason, notice this, I'm giving you, I didn't mean to actually get into real history of man, but since we're here, that was the origins of self-reflection. It was right there. But notice, at the same time, as soon as Adam found himself out there and realized that he had stepped in serious shit, that he had blown the whole, of course he didn't know he'd blown it because he didn't know what a good deal it was until suddenly he's out in the cold. And life is not speaking to him directly, and he's all kinds of troubles. Well, having to work for a living's enough. So there he is, faced with the want ads in his hands and a cheap suit on, and no more picking fruit off a tree, and all the animals are his friends. He realizes, I have made a serious, and he goes, what'd I do? Right there was the beginning of so-called self-reflection, philosophical reflection, musing on the nature of oneself. But notice this. What caused him to go, what'd I do? External circumstance. So even that, you understand, that was the beginning of men saying that they are self-reflective. And as always, once the mind has said something, it cannot be disproven. It cannot, because if it says it, it's true. It doesn't mean that it's true in some objective way, but it's true that the mind said it. And if you go back to the mind and say, well, that's not true, the mind goes, what'd I just say? And you go, yeah, but it's not true. And it goes, what part of the sentence didn't you understand? I'm speaking your language. You go, yeah, but it's not true. And the mind goes, how many times am I going to have to tell you? You want me to repeat it again? You go, no, I heard you, but it's not true. The mind just dismisses it. So there it was, the beginning of men believing that they are self-reflective, whereas they're not. And I'm just showing you that even the basis of it, the origins of it, were misplaced, because Adam was not staying outside, even though he did this like what I do. Everybody knew what I meant. You know what that means. It doesn't mean literally, what did I do? No Adam, no ordinary man would want God or somebody could tell him the truth, say, okay, I'll tell you. They don't know that. When they're saying what I do, what they're saying is, how the hell do I get out of this? How can I undo? What the hell are you people doing to me? But he didn't want to hear the voice of God, the voice of life say, well, all right, now if you're going to ask that, I'll be glad to tell you what you did. You know damn well. Nobody wants to hear that, especially Adam. Think what a hard time, by the way, he had. Nowadays, nobody blinks an eye when you blame circumstances on your distress. But think back then, Adam was the circumstance. Well, him and Eve, of course, that always makes the story better. They always blame the woman. Or at least but just imagine, you got 6 billion other people to blame. No. I mean, there's so many people now, you don't even have to be specific. It's just kind of a vague, well, you know how life is. You know how people will treat you. And yeah. Well, if you got to be real specific, you go, well, you know how bankers will treat you. You know how stockbrokers will treat you. You know how attorneys, you know how tall people, you know how foreigners will treat you. It's just anywhere. And everybody goes, yeah. But how about when you're just standing there? It was you and one other person, and then life. And life is just laid a heavy trip on you, and you're outside there in the cold going, what'd I do? Who are you going to blame? So give Adam some credit. The first mind on the planet, and it immediately was able to weasel out of having to look at itself. But notice the way it got out of having to look at itself was to turn it back out there, like to God, or he just spoke to the planet. Or maybe he turned to Eve. He went, what'd I do? You understand? That's not a question. That is a rhetorical attempt. Well, it's not an attempt, it worked, of exculpation. I'm not guilty. That's all what I do mean. People don't go in, like people don't go to a psychiatrist today. It's not just religious. Nobody goes to a psychiatrist and pay them $100 an hour to tell them what they did, to pick on you. No, you people who may just be graduating from psychiatric night school or something, I'll save you some money right now. I'll save you some rent. You will blow. You'll never get a practice going if you start telling people that come in, that walk in and say, what I do, my life's a wreck, and then they enumerate these problems. They just say, life sucks. You go, okay, you're in the right place. And they go, what I do? And they tell you a little bit about their life. I'm just trying to save you some effort now. You might as well get in another business if you're going to tell them what you think they did. That's not why they're there. You know that. So I just want you to understand that what a great stroke of, in a sense, intellectual genius Adam displayed. That there he was, nobody really else to blame it on, and yet the son of a bitch managed to pull it off. Again, I repeat, I like to give credit historically. There it is, the only man on the planet. He's pissed God off. He blew his good deal. God threw him out of the house, threw him out of the garden, slammed the door and said, get out of here. You know, you're gonna be sorry. And immediately he was. And the first thing you do is look around. But imagine it's just him on this planet. Forget Eve. It was later people made up that story to give him chauvinist. But there he is staying by himself and realized, think about it. One human in the whole universe, as far as he knows, and he screws up. It's him and God. And he manages to screw it up. So what's he going to say? But now think about it. You know, the rest of us, I'll say us generically, at least we have the sophisticated wherewithal, if not the intellectual humility, to think, you know, I can't pull this off. And yet, I'm telling you, there he stood by himself, and he goes, what'd I do? Which, again, I repeat, you understand, was not a question. It was not an inquiry as to a personal judgment by God or anyone else. It was a rhetorical attempt to escape the blame. But think about it. It's only him and God. And he goes, what'd I do? That was the beginning of so-called human intelligence. It's breathtaking that he was able to do that. It's kind of choking that after 6,000 years, the humans are still riding his coattails, as they say in politics. I mean, it's pretty shoddy now, but at least I just wanted to stop and give credit to Adam. That the original one wasn't bad. I mean, that wasn't bad for a man to stand there by himself, naked on this planet, and nobody else around, nobody in existence, and him lay the blame on somebody else, which is what I do. That's what it is. He laid the blame on somebody else, and there was no somebody else. But he did it. That's enough history. There is I'm suggesting, presenting to you, that there is a way to use consciousness, divided up into thinking and knowing. You can see it yourself in the 8 or 10 or 15 examples, the distinctions I drew in the news items tonight between thinking and knowing, that if you consider all of that and then throw in something of your own, not just taking what I said as some attempted objective, literal, scientific fact, which it is, but I won't do any good to take it that way, but add your own understanding, then, since I am up for the award of Master of the Understatement, I'll put it this way. Then many of the questions, problems, misunderstandings, lack of understanding as to the affairs of man, post-Adam, are understandable, just on that basis. All the distinctions I drew tonight between thinking and knowing, one of them, we've talked about in other ways many times, is thinking is endless speculation, whereas knowing is a kind of unified certainty. But now, notice I did not say that this was some flaw, that there was something wrong. The nature of thinking is to be endless speculation. There is a subtle aspect of it that men never notice, and that is when thinking. Now remember, thinking can turn inward or apparently out, inward or outward. I'm just telling you that as far as turning inward, forget it. If it turns inward, well, I've been through that. Thinking, its job, its primary job, is to turn outward and to deal with the external world. And there's a subtle aspect of it, though, that I don't know whether anyone will ever stumble across. It's right in front of you. Thinking is endless speculation, as I said, whereas knowing is not. And all the other variations I did tonight, that thinking is continual calculation and knowing is the sum total. Thinking is the question, knowing is the answer. Thinking is a journey, knowing is the destination. So I assume by those kind of metaphors and similes, you at least get the gist of what I intend. But now here's the subtle aspect that throws a dead Supreme Court judge into the vat of what was erstwhile pure cream. Or maybe it was a dead goat, I don't, anyway. It was just a what you call it, a figure of the law, speech. There's an aspect of thinking when it turns externally, which is its primary responsibility. If thinking never turns internally, which I suggested to you that it hardly ever does in my understated way, or it never does, according to how strong you are, turning to the external world is its natural responsibility. But there is a subtle aspect of what it can do externally that keeps it from realizing its lack of ability, its lack of even participation, but specifically its lack of useful ability if it were turned internally. And it is this, that turned externally, thinking can apparently reach some exact results. That there are times under certain conditions, which I'm going to point out, they're easy, everybody knows what they are, but me describing through all those new times that thinking is an endless string of questions, speculations, etc., and knowing is not, whatever I mean by knowing, which obviously what I mean is some other state of thinking, some other state, another mode of consciousness, rather than just what we call thinking. The thinking you're born with, whatever the thinking you're born with, that's thinking. It's not just your thinking. It may seem like your thinking, and yours seems different from the person next to you, but it's all just thinking. There is an aspect of thinking, normally referred to as science, which is all man-made, remember. The laws of science do not exist. Men made them up, same way as mathematics do not exist. The things we count, if we're going to count apples, money, if it's actual physical gold pieces, they're there. But everyone understands, if you think about it a second, that it doesn't exist. It's all inventions of thinking. But there are certain inventions of thinking specifically referred to as science, wherein there are known, exact, predictable conclusions. That is, 2 and 2 is 4. And thinking enjoys that. Not so fast there, Bunky. Some thinking enjoys that. Some thinking does not. There has been historically a struggle going on this planet, a mental struggle, a struggle within the realm of consciousness. It's normally couched in the terms of the religious versus the scientific. But I'm going to tell you what it is. Well, you all know the manifestations of it, such as now, time we're taping this, there is, again in the United States specifically, a recurrence of the battle in public education as to whether the scientific-based Darwinian idea of evolution and creation and the cosmologist notion of the Big Bang, etc. But whether all of this, the creation and the evolution, should be taught as fact, or whether indeed the religiously inclined people do not have a right to have the alternative of creationism, as they call it. They now have made it sound as though it's a competing science. Well, you understand the reason they do it, but you know what it is? Forget religion, forget God, forget Darwin, forget biological evolution. I'm going to tell you the basis of it, and it has always been there, is that some thinking, that is some people's thinking, if you want to put it that way, but it's one aspect of the thinking life does through man. There have always been, I'll have to go make it easier to talk about, go ahead and put it in personal heads. There have always been groups of people whose thinking, they've always been the minority. There's nothing to make of this. It's just the movement of humanity going from the physical survival instincts into more of the mental world. But so don't take anything about having to do with the ratio other than where we are in some infinite spectrum of time. But to a lesser degree, the smallest number have been minds who, their mode of consciousness is they enjoyed the exactness of so-called scientific thinking. They do not have to be scientists, they just enjoy it. It's kind of people that, there's nothing strange about this. Now, you all know people like that. You may be one of them, or all of you got some dose of it. To be interested in this, that you probably enjoy chess or word games or crossword puzzles. But just the thing is, even if you're not a mathematician, there is a certain kind of appeal. Just when you read, if you don't understand all, maybe you'll read some new idea, some theory based upon some new discovery that astronomers have made, or that nuclear physicists have made regarding the structure of reality, material reality. That you just read a little something and somebody's new theory. What it amounts to is that somebody reaffirms that 2 and 2 is 4 on some new level, or in some area that by God, 2 and 2 is 4. And there are people whose minds read that and they enjoy it. Just to read it. They just enjoy it. It gives them a nice feeling to know that 2 and 2 is 4 and that people are still working on it. There are more people in the world, always have been, that do not. And they enjoy that. Now, I do not mean that they're out in the streets picketing, the mathematics department. It doesn't mean that they overtly and actively dislike science. But what I mean is they do not enjoy it. They do not read about it. They don't listen to it if there's a news item, if they're watching TV. It simply does not attract their thinking. Contraire is exemplified in an extreme by the fundamentally religious, or the religious fundamentalists. That is, they like the idea that is more native to thinking, not knowing, but to thinking, and that is that 2 and 2, God knows what it is. Which, is that not the name of religion? Is that not the name of all beliefs as opposed to science? Again, they don't sit around, as you know, in your own mind. They do not sit around and think, boy, I sure do enjoy thinking that doesn't seem to get anywhere. We all know that is not the way it happens. But this is one of the areas I assume, it sounds as though I'm doing pretty good tonight, or we all are. You simply understand what I'm doing, and not because you should have. Anybody can listen to me talk for any length of time. You've got both abilities in you. It's just whether you can jump back and forth, and I pick out the right examples, because I know you can do it. And I assume from the sound of it that most of you have, and those of you that might be watching or seeing this later, hearing this, it's simply that there are people on the planet, always have been, that are attracted to that thinking. Remember, we're still talking about thinking, but thinking which seems to be exact and come to predictable conclusions, but it's always, notice this now notice, it is always regarding the external world, never turned internally. Remember, we're talking about two different things. We're talking about thinking versus knowing, and thinking and knowing both can apparently can go externally, be directed externally or internally. There are some minds that their mode of consciousness is thinking. And the thinking they most enjoy, the thinking that they're most comfortable with, the thinking that in fact gives them pleasure if they notice it, is thinking which seems to be exact and predictably conclusive, such as 2 and 2 is 4. The whole world of science. They're in the minority. Again, that doesn't matter. But then most of the thinking on this planet are people who are more comfortable with, more familiar with thinking, and more attracted to it, thinking that is not exact and predictably conclusive. But in both cases, it is out there. In the sense, now based on the fact that the first example I gave, It's obvious. All you got to do is see it. It's true. It's not my theory. That there are people attracted to science who do not make a living at it, are not professionals, and are not experts. They just like the idea. In the same way as I said, they might even just like the idea of chess. It's just a turn in one's thinking that likes the idea, is attracted to the notion that there are predictable, exact things in life. But notice, when we say in life, it's always out there. And there are also people whose mode of consciousness is thinking, and they are not attracted to that. They're not necessarily hostile to it. They might be. That would be like the fundamentalists, scream that we should take out the teaching of the Big Bang Theory as the origins of man. But we're not talking about them. I'm just talking about the vast majority of humans. Their thinking is more familiar with. They are more attracted. They feel more comfortable with thinking that is really inexact. It's always open to speculation. That somebody can say, well, I'm a Baptist and I don't believe God likes this. And you're sitting there listening. Maybe another guy standing at the bar goes, well, I'm Catholic and the Pope says that that's none of God's business. It's just, it doesn't have to be that. There could be somebody saying, I'll tell you what, there's not a doubt in my mind. Next year, it will be in the World Series, it will be Toronto and Atlanta. You count on it. And some other guy goes, are you serious? And he starts saying about, the farm teams of Toronto. In other words, it is conflicting ideas. And let us say that the guy listening in the first instance was interested in religion. In the second instance, he's interested in sports. And he may even chime in. He goes, nah, both of you got wrong. It won't be Atlanta or Toronto. And you throw in yours. And if you're just an average guy, you know damn well you don't know. But you may, reach in your pocket and say, I tell you what, I'll bet you $50 right now. And you don't want to bet money. Some of you are fairly sober. It's just a game. Because you know that you don't know. Even though you might be saying, I guarantee you, I'll bet you my paycheck right now, damn it. You guys don't know. I guarantee you this, Toronto won't be in there. And some of them, they're just waiting for you to shut up so they can say something. The point being, you understand? Nobody under ordinary conditions ever stands around after they're discussing. It could be, conflicting political parties. But the Republicans should be in. The Whigs should be back. Bring back the Whigs, by God. Or, where's the socialists? And, nobody knows where it's going, but there are people who are familiar with that. That is the name, primarily, of thinking's game. That it is not exact, it is not conclusive, it continues to just sort of ramble on. It is diverse, it is complex, and all thinking has opposing thinking. It has conflicting thinking. That is the mode of thinking, the mode of consciousness with which most people are familiar, they feel comfortable, and they're attracted thereto. But the fact that even that latter group who are not attracted to exactness, they're aware of the fact. They may say, I hate science, or I hate math. You bring up math. If you tried to point out to them that you guys are talking about things, nobody can decide which is the best political party, nobody can decide here in this, this group you're talking. Then somebody got in an argument about the World Series, about baseball, and then somebody started on about politics. Look at you going from politics, sports, religion. Have you noticed everybody's got different opinions? That thinking's always in conflict amongst the peers, people with the same kind of education, same kind of experience. They might go, so? You go, but do you ever think? Science is one area where there are conclusions. Most of those people go, science. You go, mathematics. Now, you all know, most people, the majority of people on this planet go, mathematics. Jesus, I failed it in high school. Gives me the willies. I hate mathematics. How can you hate mathematics? Oh, I hate it. God damn, don't start that crap with me. You're going to bring us all down. We're having fun here talking. You won't bring up mathematics. You go, yeah, but the only reason I bring it out is I just wonder what you ever thought about. Everybody has different opinions. I mean, you're all friends, same background, and look at you. Somebody's waving the flag for the Democrats, somebody over here the Republicans, somebody for Toronto, somebody for Atlanta, somebody for Catholicism, somebody for Protestantism. They go, yeah. You go, well, it's just always differing opinions. They go, yeah. You go, but don't you see that there's just sort of at least a theoretical beauty to science, like mathematics, that there are certainties? There is no conflict in mathematics. There's not two schools of thought, that 2 and 2 is 4, and then an equally valid school that says, oh no, 2 and 2 is 5. And you ask the people, doesn't that appeal to you? And most of them go, ooh, no. Don't talk to me about mathematics. I told you I failed it, I don't hear about it. I've got a high school. Think about it. But it has an overall effect. That effect being that without any analyzation, it's just part of the whole schmear of thinking, the neurohuman activity on this planet, that then it is now a part of thinking. It's accepted as just reality, not a theory. It's not analyzed. It wasn't adopted. It is just part and parcel of thinking. That since, make it simple, that people know that there is an exactness possible, such as in mathematics, in the external world, then when men start turning it and saying that they're turning it on the internal world, like psychological self-reflection, trying to explain not just human behavior, but the motivations, what's internally. Then when it's, whether somebody states it or not, the unsaid basis is, the tacit premise is, that obviously somewhere along the line there is the possibility internally of exactness because there is externally. Now nobody ever analyzes this. This is the subtle part that I said I don't ever see people stumbling across. It's just, it's too far removed from the basic structure of the way thinking works. But since the mind knows, everyone knows, any lucid, literate person on this planet knows that to some degree externally there's what appears to be some areas of exactness. Mathematics. Just mathematics. And not just in theory, they're banking. What taxes they have to pay. They know if they're confronted with mathematics, they try to weasel out paying their taxes. The IRS calls them in and they show them that they subpoenaed their bank records, and you can hate math all you want to. They call you in for an audit and they go, look here, you reported income last year of $2,700, and look right here, just last February, we got your whole year's, we subpoenaed them all, just last February, in one bank that we found, you deposited at one time $7,500. And you can hate math all you want to, and it's like, uh-oh, you know, may I call my attorney, or could we strike a deal? Or maybe I made a mistake. I'm sorry about what I said about you and your mother when I first walked in, by the way. What a lovely person, what a nice suit you have. You understand that there is an acceptance, and that could be the same guy that failed math, but he understands that there's an exactitude to certain things in life. He knows enough to have a bank account, to fill out a deposit slip, to count money, and so here it is, the IRS saying you reported last year income totaling $2,700, and they go, yeah. And then they whip out a copy of his bank deposit just for 1 month last year, and at one time was $7,500. And there it is. The man may never think of math. We're not talking theoretically. He simply knows this. He accepts it as part of the thinking of this planet, that there is an exactitude that cannot be denied. In other words, he knows he's been had. Right there it is. That is exact, predictable, and you can't interpret it. He knows that. If you're just a sane, lucid person, he cannot turn to the IRS agent and say, wait a minute, perhaps you and I have a different, I don't know, understanding, perception of what 2,700 means as opposed to 75. Why don't we discuss it? I mean, we're adults, we're educated people. Why don't we discuss, areas that we might be able to maneuver, that, there could be some difference of opinion. Valid. They're going to say, get out of here. Get out of here. Figures don't lie. And you go, yeah, I know. On that basis, whether you ever think about it or not, it then bleeds over into the ideas when people speak about that the internal workings of man, the psychology of man. It is then an unspoken acceptance that it is possible. That in other words, if somebody made a statement that there is no such thing on this planet in the non-physical world. I'm not talking about the physical world. Seems predictable and exact. We all know that you know, you turn loose of something you're holding, it falls. You drink poison, you die. There seems to be exactness. You stick your hand in fire, it always burns. There's nothing else to think about. And the next time somebody shows you fire, and they go, this fire is different from the kind you've known. Stick your hand there, it won't burn you. If you're, again, a sane person, there's nothing to think about. They go, think about it. Have I ever lied to you? Look at me. I'm an honest, look at me. Look what and you go, yeah, but, and you know in the past, you've stuck your hand in the fire one time when you was a kid and you still remember it. And they go, yeah, but this is a different fire. I mean, we're in Mongolia now. Have you ever been to Mongolia before? And you go, no. Have you ever seen Mongolian fire? Have you ever read about it? No. Trust me. Put your hand in it. You're not going to. You take that as an exactness through experience, not just theory. But again, if someone begins to speak on the basis that we're going to describe the internal workings of man, the psychology of man, it is accepted. Just goes without saying that it is possible to be exact. Maybe this person is not going to be exact. Some very sophisticated person or peoples on this planet might say that thus far there is no collective, systematic exactness yet. In other words, that there is no true science of psychology in the sense of not behavior but of the workings of the mind. They might say we have yet to have it. But note this, they would find you less than lucid and civilized if you said it'll never happen. They would say contraire. We may not be there, but it's just that they take it as a done deal. That is the basis that it is possible to be exact internally. And if I say, well, you got no basis for that. And if they went, no, then I could jump in and do what I've done with you. I could go, okay, I'll give you a break. And I could go through that little bit I did about mathematics and science and say, you see, there is some exactness possible on this planet. And they go, well, thank you. And then they turn to me and say, all right, I'll disprove it. In other words, I could give them the weapons. I could do their job for them. That after I said there's no possibility on this planet, there is no such creature, there is no such entity, there is no such thing as exactness in the non-physical world. In ordinary minds, I would say would be pushed to come up with something. Somebody might finally say science. But if I said that, and they finally said that, and then I said there's nothing comparable to it internally. As I said, most people would just disagree and they couldn't push it any further. I mean, they'd tolerate this kind of intellectual activity about all they could. They'd probably be getting dizzy and disoriented and about to throw up on my new shoes by then. But if they could hold on to the thought for a few seconds, let's just say it was the kind of person that when I challenged them that there was no such thing as exactness on this planet, predictable conclusiveness, and they thought about it, and on the general parade of life, let's just say that they were unusually intelligent, at the higher end of intellectual development, mechanical on this planet, and they thought about it a second and went, well, you're wrong, science. And I said, okay, you're right. And then I said, yeah, but that's now external. You understand that is the mind dealing with the external world, that's science. They go, okay. And I go, well, notice this, though. There is nothing internally comparable to that. And I say it was these same intellectually advanced people, just at the mechanical level. And if they thought about it for a minute, if they didn't deny outright and say, well, yes, there is, they would do this. They would say, well, we're working on it. Because you understand, once they have accepted the fact, or once they even stated it to me, if I didn't have to prompt them, but they have accepted the fact that there is exactness possible to man on this planet non-physically, to wit, science. Things out there. And I said, well, but there's nothing comparable that thinking. All right, I'll give you that. Thinking can look out there, and they've conjured up, or whatever words that they would accept, the laws of physics, the laws of science and chemistry, mathematics. All right, they've done that. And the person goes, yeah, I knew that. I go, but there is nothing comparable if you turn thinking inward. And they would go, at best, as I said, they would probably say, well, we may not have the human mind. We may not have thinking down to the kind of exact science such as 2 and 2 is 4. But we are zeroing in. We're making progress. We're working on it. And I said, so you believe that it's possible, the day will come that thinking will be as exact and sure of itself, about itself, as it is about mathematics. And they go, oh yeah, no doubt about it. When they're supposed to. There's nothing wrong. They're supposed to do that. It is not so. But notice, I've used up all my time with the one thing, but notice the subtle aspect. When I say subtle, I do not mean to diminish its power. It is just so subtle that people do not notice, but its power is all-encompassing to thinking. Because the mind it just will not conceive of thinking. The mind, consciousness in the thinking mode cannot be told that thinking will never reach anything exact and conclusive about itself. Because as far as thinking goes, if it was really pushed and thought about it with my help, it can use the external world, some of its concepts, scientific, or even, like I said, non-scientific, experiential, that there's some things exact to a man an illiterate man even, who doesn't know nothing about mathematics or science. He knows that fire burns. He does not have to think about it. He knows it's exact. He simply does. And he knows that if he turns loose of something fragile, an egg, a piece of pottery he made to carry water from a water hole back to his cave, he knows that if he lets it go, it's broke. It's no longer useful. He knows that he does not have to think about it. To him, that's exact. But if you try to tell thinking there is nothing comparable internally and will not be, it has no conception of it. As I said, tacitly, without any analyzation, just based on what I'm describing, that it never thinks about in that way. It certainly never applies any further. But that seems to deny what I am stating, that there is exactness possible, and we all know there is. So don't tell me that we won't get it there. Reservoir.